My name is Jonathan Kowarsky. I teach the course Negotiation as a Basis to Conflict Resolution. And in my course, you get a chance to practice negotiation, practice focusing, being aware that the negotiation is a process, and that at the end of the day, if you control the process, you have a better chance of controlling the outcome. So thinking on a process level, combining the content, that is something we'll work throughout the semester.
Now, the tool I wanted to share with you is called the ladder of interpretation. And the ladder of interpretation basically states that in any kind of negotiation, we generally tend to have three levels. The lowest level, the bottom level, is the level of facts and observations. Okay, the middle level would be the interpretation of those facts, and the top level would be the conclusions. Generally, when negotiation begins to feel very uncomfortable and people start running around and looping, saying things over and over again, and things begin to feel very stuck, it's because my conclusion is in contradiction with Christian's conclusion. And that's not to say that Christian conclusion is better or worse than mine, but it will be very difficult for me to persuade Christian that his conclusion is incorrect. It will be very difficult for me to persuade, or for Christian to persuade me that my conclusion is not intact. Because very often people include within their conclusions not just facts, but also values. Values, beliefs, norms. And those are things that we don't like to trade. I'm happy to negotiate with Rafal money. That makes no difference. But when it comes to values, and it comes to norms, and it comes to ethical issues, then we're more, we feel much more vulnerable doing it. So we don't want to, some values are not for sale. I'll sell my value for $50,000, $100,000. Oh, that's not a really important value. That can go for $10. It's very difficult. So people get sort of engaged within these values, and it starts moving. And there's some kind of loop. I try to persuade Christian, Christian tries to persuade me, and it's just not working. What's very, very useful in this ladder is to just go up and down, and it can be very, very useful. So I just want to give you a cross-cultural example, and through that we can demonstrate some of the situations that you may have had with Jamie and Alison. So if you need to imagine right now that I was invited to give a short lecture in Japan, in Osaka, about how mediation can be integrated into the Japanese legal system. Now I know that my lecture will be very contentious. I have to lecture in front of 1,000 Japanese prosecutors. I know as a lawyer that prosecutors are very reticent when it comes to change, when you talk about procedure. I know that in Israel and Japan there's the same amount of lawyers nominally, and in Israel there are less than 8 million inhabitants. In Japan a little bit more than 130 million inhabitants. So sometimes the saying goes that there are more Jews in Israel than in Japan, but that's, of course, that's not a serious response. It's different cultures, okay? Different cultures. So by me going to give this lecture in front of 1,000 Japanese prosecutors, I've got to be very, very careful. When I go, the facts and my observations are that the lecture is supposed to start at 4 p.m. I arrive at 3:30 just to make sure that my host is there, that the presentation is ready, that all the gadgets are ready to go. And then I see that at 3:45, those 1,000 prosecutors begin storming into the hall. So I look at my watch and I say, have they put forward the lecture? Is it supposed to start at 3:45 because it said 4 o'clock? And my host says, no, of course it starts at 4 o'clock, but if they don't start entering at 3:45, you won't be able to start your lecture at your lecture at 4 o'clock. And then they say, isn't that the same in Israel? Now when we're overseas, we always lie, because it doesn't make us feel very comfortable. And we say, of course, in Israel, generally, if you say 4 o'clock, people will come at 4:15, 4:30, and feel very comfortable. So I see that this is the situation. At 4 p.m., everyone's sitting down quietly. They have their earplugs. I'm in English. They've been getting some kind of interpretation, translation back into Japanese. Total silence. Now, it's not a very nice thing to say, and it could sound a little bit racist, but everyone looks the same to me. They're all Japanese, they're all short, they're all got dark hair, straight, their eyes are a bit Japanesey. They're all, whatever that means. They all are wearing dark suits, white shirts, and the ties are somewhere between dark red and sort of a regular red. So they all look the same. Those are my facts and my observations. I start the lecture. No one's saying anything. Now, from my experience in Israel, when you give a lecture in front of prosecutors and you talk about something that they're not accustomed to, before you've completed your first sentence, at best someone will raise their hand or someone will interrupt and say, the idea is perfect, it doesn't suit Israelis in Israel. It's a very nice idea, but it couldn't work here. And they tell you why you're wrong, why it's silly, why it won't work, why it's whatever though. So for me to go to Japan and to talk about it and no one says anything, they're totally quiet. And then I'm beginning to think, maybe they're not listening to my lecture. They've got their earplugs, but they're listening to some kind of Japanese television or radio show. And so I keep on nattering, they don't care. But even in a Japanese audience, you can see whether people need to use the bathroom, if they're interested, if they're disinterested, etc., etc. People are people, even Israelis. So at some stage during the lecture, even though they're very, very quiet, I noticed that some of them begin to nod their heads. What does that mean in Japanese culture, if someone's nodding their head?
They're listening.
That they're listening. That's very interesting. What does it mean if I'm an Israeli when someone nods his head? What am I thinking?
Agreeing.
They're agreeing. So I'm thinking, I was very careful when I presented mediation because I know that the Japanese culture is very they use hierarchy, and that mediation is very there's no hierarchy in it, and people are supposed to be talking eye level, and I know that it's a bit foreign to Japanese culture. But what I said in the beginning was that mediation doesn't work in most cases. In fact, you've got to make many, many reservations because, in fact, mediation will only be useful in very, very specific cases. And even in those cases, I really tried to make it very, very small so as not to create any kind of antagonism against me and the idea of mediation. And I'm thinking to myself, when you come in a respectful way, not trying to be overbearing and say, guys, listen to me, I'll show you the light, etc., etc., etc. So when you do that, people are respectful and they're agreeing with what I say. At the end of the lecture, after 90 minutes, they are clapping their hands. So my conclusion is that, in fact, I am very close to stardom, because if they take my paper and they include it within the Japanese legal system, I'll have quite a lot to say for myself, so I'm very happy after 90 minutes. The Japanese audience, on the other hand, is saying, yes, the same observations and facts, but totally different interpretation. They say, yes, we did come at 3:45 so that you could start at 4. And yes, even though we were on vacation, we came with our suits because, we wanted to respect someone coming from overseas who's giving a lecture. And of course we were listening to you. And by the way, the fact that we seem very similar to you, we actually were in Israel 2 weeks ago, and all of you look the same. And you go, no, you must get it wrong. Because look at my cheekbones, it's very different. I say, no, you actually look exactly the same. I say, no, we're very different. I'm from the northern parts of Syria, and she's from southern parts of Poland. And they say, it may be, but you look exactly the same. For them, we do look exactly the same. And then what happens is they say, of course, when you started to lecture, why would we interrupt you? In Israeli society, do people just speak in order to speak? Just speak in order to be voiced, to voice their opinions? And once again, I lie and I say no, but the fact is that that's exactly what happens. And then they say we were very quiet. And when we nod, that's exactly what some of you are saying, that's to actually signal to you that we were listening. But the fact that we were listening, we were actually quite in shock. Such a load of baloney we haven't heard in a long, long while. Because how could you possibly think that mediation would suit our culture? We're an island, we're a homogeneous people, we use hierarchy. When negotiation doesn't work, why would we go to a mediator who doesn't have any authority to come up with a solution or impose the solution? That doesn't make sense. Do you actually go to people that can't tell you what to do, can't give you some kind of resolution, and you share with them your intimate problems? And why would you do that? But if that works for you, that's fine. We don't like it. And then at the end of the day, they say, yes, they did clap. And the reason, first of all, they were was probably very happy that it ended. They wanted to be respectful, but what I'm showing you in this cross-cultural example is that after 90 minutes, even though we share the same observations, we're 180 degrees different on our conclusions based on what we saw. So this is a cross-cultural example that's very, very easy.